It was a heart hand gesture. I feel like I need to specify what hand gesture it was. Anyway, what's up, guys? My name is Zach. I am the young adult pastor and the online campus pastor here at Park Valley, in case you didn't know. And if you didn't, now you do. That's who I am. I get to hang out with you guys, and I love every second of it. We are in week 2 of biblical reliability. Week 1 was actually 2 weeks ago when we talked a lot about context and everything like that. Last week we had our night of worship, and now this week is week 2. So we talked a lot about kind of not biblical standards, but the standards that people hold for a text to be considered historically accurate, and how the Bible blows those standards out of the water. If you missed that and you're in our Discord, you can go back into the message notes channel and reread that entire message or listen to it. If you're not in our Discord, we'll put that slide up a little bit later. You just scan a QR code and it'll drop you right in there. It's a great place to be. On top of that, we also talked about different contexts to look at when you study the Bible. You have historical context, cultural context, and geographical context, on top of just simply reading what is around the words, right? Like the classic context that you look for when you're in school and everything like that. Today, we're going to talk more about the Bible backing itself up and how nothing in the Bible contradicts itself or anything like that. And we're also going to talk about digging our roots in deep to Christ, kind of using that analogy of a tree and digging those roots down deep so that a little gust of wind doesn't come along and just blow you over because you haven't dug those roots down deep. I've actually had a lot of conversations with people where they start having these doubts and everything like that, which is totally a normal thing. And there's a verse in the Bible, you have to forgive me, I didn't write it down or put it on the slides or anything like that, but it basically says that milk is good for a child, but then when you move into adulthood, you now need meat, right? So I have a 2-year-old daughter, Maisie. When she was first born, it was all milk all the time, right? And now that she's almost 2, she needs a little bit more than just milk, right? She needs protein, she needs things like that. She needs to start eating solid foods. If you take that analogy and work it back into our faith, when you first come to know Christ, maybe right out the gate, you're believing everything that people are telling you. You're just listening to the people on stage, and that's what you're using as your sustenance for your relationship with Christ. But at some point, you're going to start having more and more questions, and you need to learn how to pursue these questions. And really all it is, a lot of times people get doubts, and they think that like, oh, no, I'm having doubts. I must be like losing my relationship with Jesus because I'm doubting him. No, the opposite is true. You're moving from milk to meat. It's not bad. It's something to pursue. And so with this biblical reliability, what I said last week is we're going to try and get you as much information as we possibly can. That is our goal, for you to be able to look at the Bible and be able to kind of break it down a little bit on your own. That doesn't mean that you should never ask questions, though. Like, don't be ashamed to shoot me a text message or whatever it is and ask me a question, or whoever. It doesn't have to be me. Do not be afraid of those questions. But people out there will come up with a good sounding argument. They will make things sound good, and if you don't know what to look for, maybe flaws in their argument, or maybe something they're talking about doesn't make sense, or it looks like it makes sense, but they're taking things out of context, that's what you need to look for. But if your roots aren't dug deep and you're not constantly studying the Bible and digging into this stuff, that little gust of wind that comes along from that person could potentially just knock you over. You know, and there's people out there that think that the Bible contradicts itself. One example, and I'm not going to go through every single example in the Bible where people think that the Bible contradicts it, because that would be a long time of me telling you what they're comparing and then the breakdown of it all. It would be a really long time. I'm going to use an example that's a relatively easy example for us to look at. But if you look in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 16, you don't have to turn there. I'm just going to read it to you. Otherwise, you're going to be flipping all over the place. But Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 16, it says, "But you must not eat the blood, pour it out on the ground like water." This verse is talking about when they would slaughter animals, which is kind of gross. I feel like it would be implied that you don't drink the blood like a vampire, but you never know. So this verse is telling you don't drink the blood, but people will take that verse and compare it to this one, which is Matthew 26, 27 through 28. And this is when they're at the Last Supper and Jesus is breaking the bread and giving out the wine, basically doing the first communion, right? And so it says this: "Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sin." So if you just look at those two verses side by side, no other context put into place, you're like, oh snap, Jesus is going against the Bible. However, if you read just a little bit more in that story in Matthew, you'll see that they're drinking wine and not blood like some sort of cannibal, right? So if you just simply look a little bit further, you'll understand the full picture of what's going on. In the Bible, all the time, even with Jesus, uses symbolism to make a point. Jesus spoke in parables all the time. That's how you get the prodigal son and other stories like that. He spoke in parables constantly. And the reason why you do that is so that you can take a complicated idea and have it make sense a little bit easier. To be completely honest with you, I don't know if you guys are Office fans. Any fans of The Office? Yeah? So the way I learned what a surplus was the same way that Michael Scott did when their finance dude, Oscar, came in. He's like, we have a surplus. We need to spend this or we could lose it. And Michael's like, can you explain that to me like I'm 2 years old? And Oscar said, let's say mommy and daddy give you $10 to start a lemonade stand, but you find out that it only costs you $8 to run that lemonade stand. But if you tell mommy and daddy that it only costs you $8 to run a lemonade stand, next time you want to run a lemonade stand, they're only going to give you $8. So what you want to do is spend the other $2 so that mommy and daddy thinks that it costs $10. And so that's how I learned what a surplus was through The Office. And it's through symbolism and an example. It might be a little bit silly, but it's okay to use those things. There's symbolism and metaphors all throughout the Bible. It exists. It's there. And those things are totally okay because it's going to help us understand those points just a little bit better. But ultimately, nothing in the Bible has ever been disproven and nothing has ever contradicted itself. Next week, we're going to talk a lot about outside sources backing up the Bible. And my buddy Will, who's our middle school pastor, is going to come in and talk about it. I've actually told him, I don't want you guys to be caught off guard. I've told him to talk a little bit about dinosaurs and the Bible because believe it or not, I get that question all the time. And I'm going to be really frank with you guys. I don't really care about dinosaurs. I understand that they exist or existed. I guess if you count maybe an alligator, they exist or however you want to work it. I've just never been overly interested in dinosaurs. So when I don't see them in my everyday life, I'm not thinking, oh, where are the dinosaurs? However, Will is very interested in dinosaurs, and so he knows a lot about that. So he's going to come in, he's going to touch a little bit on that, but he's also going to talk about other things as well that back up the Bible to be true. And he's going to come in, like I said, he's one of my best buds, so I'm really excited to have Will out here talking with you guys. But the reason why we wanted to go through this stuff is because I don't want you guys to have your faith be shaken over an illogical argument. Right? Because all the time, like we used a silly, simple example, but all the time, people are going to come in and point out a Bible verse or show you something or tell you something that's going to make sense initially. It's just what's going to happen. I encountered some dudes at Walmart one time. I've probably told you guys this 150 million times. I encountered some dudes at Walmart, and they're like, did you know that if you don't take communion, that you're going to go to hell? And I'm like, dude, good thing we take communion over at Park Valley every once in a while, you know. We're all set. He's like, no. And this is like, I had already poked a hole in his thinking without even knowing it. He's like, you have to do it every week. And I'm like, where does it say that? And he busts out this verse. He's like, if you don't take communion, I forget what verse it was. He's like, you're going to die or something. I'm like, okay, interesting. And then I had a question asked to me when I was in school. That was a really good question. And it was my professor asked it. He said, if you had 5 minutes, like you knew someone was going to die in 5 minutes for whatever reason, right? They were conscious and you could talk to them and both of you knew what was going to happen in 5 minutes, that they were just going to die. Now, typically, if someone's 5 minutes from death, they're incoherent, they're not responsive, right? But let's say in this scenario, he is. And he said, this person is not saved. What do you need to tell them in the next 5 minutes for them to be able to accept Jesus? What do you include? Right? And so all the people in my class started trying to answer the question, and my professor played a little bit of devil's advocate, and he'd be like, what about creation? Do we need to hit on creation? And people are like, oh, man, yeah, creation's good. He's like, what about the Trinity? Do they need to know about the Trinity? And they're like, oh, yeah, the Trinity. And I remember thinking, they just need to know about Jesus. Like, that's it. Because they're going to figure the rest out later. You know, like they just need to know that Jesus died for their sins and that's it. And that is the only way to get to heaven is through a relationship with Christ. And I knew that and I studied that. I had that question asked me while I was in school. So when this guy came along and started posing this argument to me, I posed the exact same question back to him. And I'm like, so you're telling me you go to do a hospital visit, right? And I don't know about these guys, but like I'm super forgetful. I'll go in and out of my house about 5 times before I leave. Like, there was one week I walked up here to play bass and left my bass backstage. Like, I got all the way over here, and I'm like, my bass didn't even come out with me. Like, I'm just a forgetful person. So I'm like, dude, what if you go to do that hospital visit? You know this person's going to die in 5 minutes. You need to get them saved. You want to get them to heaven. You're going to be like, dude, I forgot my communion stuff, and I live 30 minutes out. Like, you're going to look at that guy, just be like, sorry, bro. It's fun while it lasted, though, right? You know? No. And so what he responded to me is he was like, well, I think everybody, like, God has a different salvation plan for every person. And then I stopped him like, well, is God just? And he said, yeah. I'm like, is it just and fair to have a different way to get out of a punishment for every single person? Like, if someone's a murderer, does it make sense for that murderer to have to do, like, all these, or like someone who's not a murderer have to do all these crazy hard requirements, but someone who is a murderer never has a chance to take communion, and yet they can get into heaven? Like, is that fair? Is that just? And then he started getting a little angry because I was like poking holes left and right in his argument. And I was like, what's fair and what's just is that there is one thing that taints you, and there's one thing that gets you into heaven, but it can't be earned. Right? Sin entered our life because of our own fault, and there's nothing that we can do about it. But Jesus came and made that path possible for us. And there's nothing that we have to do to earn it. Like, that's just and that's fair. Someone else paid the price for us. And it's the same across the board for every single person. John 14:6 says, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. But if you look here in Matthew chapter 7, verse 15 through 27, it warns us about people like this. It says, watch out for false prophets. Seems pretty black and white to me, but we'll keep going. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from the thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, do we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. This is saying that people will come along with a good argument, but you need to look at what is being produced in their lives. I think on this verse all the time, right? Not everyone who cries out, Lord, Lord, will inherit the kingdom of heaven. And it's not saying that, like, you have to sit there and be freaking out, right? Be like, man, I thought I had a relationship with Jesus. No, this is a warning to you that someone's going to come in and be like, yeah, man, like, I'm a follower of Jesus, but did you know that the Bible's not 100% true? Like, that's kind of what it's going to look like a little bit. Not every single person who claims to be of Christ is of Christ. Some of the most legalistic people out there get so caught up in, like, doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing that they miss out on the relationship with Jesus part. I think sometimes our ministry as a church is just as important to people who don't know Jesus whatsoever as it is to the people who claim that they do. Because sometimes they get lost or they forget about that relationship with Jesus. That is the most important part, right? So it's telling you how to look out for these people as well. Like, look at what is being produced in their life. Is it good or is it bad? In the past, I have dealt with a lot of people who struggled with gossip. And one thing that you could tell is maybe their friend groups shifted frequently, right? They would have a best friend one week, and then they wouldn't be best friends with that person the next week. But yet at the same time, when talking with these people, or talking with several people at the same time, every single person could give me the exact correct answer on what to do if you encountered gossip, which is, number one, you end it. It stops with you. You don't repeat it. And number two, I would challenge you that whoever they're gossiping about, you flip the script and you build that person up, right? If they're talking about whoever, we'll use Jordan as an example because I know him. If they're talking about Jordan in a negative way, you would flip the script and be like, yeah, but did you know that Jordan volunteers on Wednesdays and he's heavily involved in our kids ministry and like all this? Like, you would then start building that person up, not just for the sake of that person, but everybody else who's standing in that circle where somebody was trying to tear him down. Now you're building Jordan back up in the eyes of everybody else in there, right? I digress a little bit, but that's a pretty good way to handle gossip. But everyone could look me in the eyes and tell me that thing right back at me, right? And I'll say it over and over and over again. But as you start to look at the fruit that was coming from people's lives, you could start to tell, like, who could say it but not practice it. You know? And the Bible has this little thing in it where it says that faith without works is dead, which is kind of interesting because salvation is not works-based, right? Meaning that you don't have to do something to earn salvation. But what this is saying, because you have Christ in your life, you will produce these good things, right? You can find them in the fruits of the Spirit, like patience, kindness, goodness, self-control. These are all symptoms or signs or fruit of Christ being at the center of your life. But when Christ isn't at the center of your life, you start seeing them do other things, like they start to hate people. They gossip about people. They're getting angry frequently, right? I'm not saying everybody has to be perfect every single step of the way, but someone who is Christ in the center of their life is going to be working on these things because they recognize that these are good things, right? If you're sitting here and you have a relationship with Jesus and you have an anger problem, it's okay. Work on it. Maybe God will give you opportunities to work on that anger. But what I think will happen is maybe somebody gets a little angry, they yell at you, or they do something that they regret. They may come back and apologize. To me, that's a good sign. That's somebody who's trying to work on something. If it happens 10, 15, 20 times, they're not working that hard. You know what I mean? It's someone who blew up at you. They go back and apologize. You're like, it's all right, it's all right. It happens sometimes. We're imperfect people. And then it happens again and again and again. At some point, you got to be like, okay, are you actually working on this? Or did you find out that if you apologize, that I can get over it? He's like, did they figure out the system, or are they actually trying to make themselves better? But when you look out for those kind of people, look at the fruit that they're producing. Is it good or is it bad? Right? The second I started poking a lot of holes in this dude's theology, he then started to want to end the conversation. He even grabbed like my shopping cart at one point, and I was like, easy, tiger. Because I'm leaving this Walmart one way or the other, you know? And then he was like, well, how about we just go get some coffee sometime and we just talk about it? I'm like, nah, man, I'm good. You know, but it was like instantly he started to shift a little bit, right? Because I wasn't agreeing with what he was saying. He just instantly started to shift. And it's not always an instant thing, but I could see it like right there in that person a little bit. And then when you dig those roots down deeper, like we were saying, you're not going to topple over with every gust of wind that comes. Like maybe you have a doubt that comes in, and that's okay. You ask that question. You pursue the answer to that question. That's an okay thing to do. But when your roots are dug deep, a good argument or something that sounds good in the moment, maybe you walk away and you're like, man, it did sound good, but it just doesn't sound right. Like you can walk away knowing that, and then you can ask somebody about it later. But it's not that you're going to walk away from the conversation and be like, I think everything I've ever believed is a lie. You know? Sometimes in the young adult world, man, I think we can be like that a little bit. Like we hear something good one time, or we see it on TV, or maybe it's somebody that we don't know, but we kind of trust what that person is saying. and they say something that makes sense initially, and we walk away and be like, well, hold up now. I think I'm all wrong. I'm going to change everything. I've even seen it before where, like, I've sat down to counsel young adults. They'll be like, someone else in this group has wronged me. I don't think I can ever come back here again. I'm like, well, hold up there, Tiger. Let's work on this a little bit. Let's walk on this together. Let's see if we can make amends with this person. Like, just because one thing happened doesn't mean you have to completely abandon a group of people, because we're just imperfect people trying to lead imperfect people, right? Like, that's just what it is. Nobody up here is perfect. I make mistakes all the time. Before I came over here today, I forgot about 3 things, and I asked Hannah to bring them over, and she did it, right? Like, we're all imperfect people, and it happens. So I think talking about growing our roots deep and being able to watch out for these things, how do we do that, right? How do we grow our roots deep? Number 1, I think, is to join a connect group in some way, shape, or form. Because when you do that, you guys will all walk through a study together. You'll have fun. You'll goof around. That's my kind of connect group. I run one on Thursdays for both guys and girls. It's called the Bring Your Own Lunch Connect Group, because we meet at 12 in the loft right up here with the gym, and we just eat some food, and then we watch a little study, and it'll shift here soon because we're almost done with that study. We'll pick up a new one, but you can come at any point and just fit right in. We just eat our lunch, and we talk about stuff, and maybe we goof around a little bit. Who knows? I'm a goofy person. It's bound to happen. But Colin, it was just me and Colin one week, and it was fantastic. And we had other people join. Spencer comes and hangs out. Who else? Ben comes and hangs out. Jordan came and hang out with us one week. You're welcome to come. You don't have to come every week. I would love for you to come every week, but you are welcome to come every week. Or if you can only be there periodically, then be there periodically. We'd love to have you. We also have some Tuesday groups as well. There's one for guys and then a separate one for girls. Hannah, what time do they meet? 6? 6:30. I'm not sure. You can find it all on our website, and actually we'll talk about it at the end of the service. There's even a QR code on the back of your sermon notes. This is Join a Connect Group. You can scan that, and it'll show you all the ones mapped out for young adults. The other thing to do to dig your roots deep is to establish a regular time to read the Bible. And this can be difficult sometimes, because if you're like me, I don't like to read. I read the first, second, and third Harry Potter book, and then I saw how thick the 4th one was, and I didn't finish it. I got like a few chapters in. I'm like, I'm never going to finish this thing. I'm going to go watch the movie. That's how I roll, right? But for me, I have to be as disciplined as I can be with this time. Like, if I make it a routine, and look, I'm not perfect. I miss days. I miss weeks on occasion, right? Like, I'm an imperfect human being. But what we need to do is try everything that we can to establish a regular time to read the Bible. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. What I like to do is to pick a book of the Bible. If you've never done this before, I would recommend maybe one of the Gospels. John is a very fun read just because he writes it like a story. I like Matthew a lot because he's more black and white, right? And that just makes a lot of sense in my brain. But I go chapter by chapter. I read it. And then I like to write down. I kind of summarize it when I write it down, and then I write what I got out of it. And that just helps it stick in my brain a little bit more. I learned in college that I can read an entire chapter of something and retain nothing, right? You guys ever done that? Like, I've read a textbook, and I got to the end of the chapter, I'm like, what the heck did I just read? I have no idea. So I learned that I have to underline things and take notes and jot things down. So if you're ever walking through a study with me, you'll see me like I have things like boxed out in books with pen and stuff like that because I have to jog my memory of what I talked about. But that's just how I do it. That's not even how you have to do it. That's just how I do it. If you have no idea where to start, if you have the YouVersion Bible app, which is a free app, you can search what study you want to do. You can even do it based off an emotion. If you're feeling sad, you can type sad into the search bar, and it'll give you like 4 billion Bible studies to do, and it'll walk you through day by day scripture, maybe like a little devo that somebody's written out, and you can even invite friends to join in it with you, so you don't always have to be together, but you can make it a thing. They even have like a read a Bible in the year plan where you can do that, and there's a spot at the end for comments. It's pretty cool stuff. Anyway, just some resources. The third thing that you can do is just ask questions. You guys are always welcome to ask me as many questions as you possibly can. I'm not guaranteeing that I have the answer to everything. I do have a pretty good source in all the other pastors at Park Valley as well. So what you can trust is if you ask me a question, I don't know it, I'll be like, let me go ask some other guys. Like, let me go rally some troops. And a lot of times it's me in the office. And To one side, I have Kevin Kiak, who's our student pastor. To the other side, I got Will Landman, who's our middle school pastor. Diagonally from me is where Hannah sits now. And then on the other end of Kevin is his son, Landon. So I have some pretty great people just in my direct vicinity on a day-to-day basis that I can ask a lot of questions to. I know Pastor Barry's office is right down the hall. Tim's office, the door is always open. So, like, I have people that I can go to as well, even within the workday. Like, I kind of have that luxury. So don't be afraid to ask me questions. Don't be afraid to ask anybody questions. You get a big question, you can just email Pastor Barry. It's Barry, Barry, at parkvalleychurch.com. If you get an email from a Gmail, that's not him because he only has his Park Valley email. Someone started emailing all the staff, and it's like Pastor White at gmail.com to be like, I need you to get gift cards. And we're like, that's not right. Talk about a wolf in sheep's clothing, you know? But ask questions. Don't be afraid of questions. We're not the kind of group where you're going to brush those questions under the rug or you're going to ask it and we're going to be like, we don't talk about that here. No, we're going to talk about it, right? Ask questions. We're not afraid of it. We want to run at those doubts. We don't want to run from those doubts. And the fourth thing is get you some sources. Get you some resources. I have some examples for you guys. You can write them down, or once again, if you join the Discord, in my sermon notes, all the links will be for these things. One is a book called The Truth Is. I love this book. It's by a dude named Stephen Kozak, and part of the reason why I love it is because you can find a lot of grammar and spelling mistakes, and I think it's because he was probably writing it, and he's got young kids, and he's self-published. But it's a very good book because the first half of the book talks about the importance of apologetics, the purpose of apologetics, which is the study or the defense of the Christian faith, right? Studying those things. The other half, it starts lightly touching on apologetics. So it's a really good book in that sense because you can learn the purpose behind it, which is not to win an argument, but rather to help someone see that Jesus is a logical answer for life. The next one is Know Why You Believe by Paul E. Little. This is a great one. What I love about this book is one chapter will be proving a particular topic from a biblical standpoint, and the next chapter will be proving that same topic using outside sources from the Bible, right? And I just think that's super interesting that you can look at both of those things. How does science actually back up the Bible? So I think that this book is awesome. It's not crazy complicated or anything like that. Trust me, if it was crazy complicated, I would have never read the book, right? I've read some books like that, and they start using these crazy big words. I'm like, dude, I don't got time to Google every word in this book. That's not how this rolls. So this is a fantastic book. The next two, actually, I used this one when I was in school, and if you did Park Valley College, I think you had to use these books. But these are some awesome things. They're called The Essence of the Old Testament and The Essence of the New Testament. And what these are, if you guys have a study Bible, at the very front of each book in the Bible, it gives you a lot of context as to what's happening in that book. When was it written, who wrote it. Sometimes they tell you loosely what was happening in that culture at that time. These books go into those books of the Bible in great detail. Right? It'll break it down into different sections. I actually use these all the time when writing sermons, and I want to make sure that I understand the scripture that I'm reading so I can communicate it to you guys the best way possible. I have a copy of each of these on my desk. They're great books. And look, if you can't afford to buy these things, just come talk to me, and I'll we'll either find a way to buy it for you, or I'll let you look at the copies that I have. You can come into the office. I'll just give you those books. You can't take them home because I want them. I want them to disappear. But I've actually had to rebuy the New Testament one a couple times. But these are amazing things because they take that stuff and they break it down so well for us. And then the last resource is a study Bible. This is a picture of the one that I particularly like. It's called the Jesus Bible. It's by Passion. It's the NIV version. And it just talks about Jesus throughout the entire Bible. So all the little blurbs that they have and excerpts, it talks about Jesus even in the Old Testament. And I think it just got some really good stuff. The NIV version is a little simpler to understand. I also like the New King James version because they keep a lot of those big words that help describe what they're talking about a little bit better. But they also kind of got rid of some of the Old English, like the thee before thou, except after thine kind of stuff. Right? But that's just the one that I use. There are several great options. But the free Bible that we give out to people, it's great. It's fantastic. It's not a study Bible, right? You're going to miss out on some of those big context things that could help you when just reading through the Bible. So if you have one of those, like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad about it. But you can snag you a study Bible, and in the moment, without having to get 5 or 10 books, you can get some pretty good context as to what's happening and to help you understand things a little bit better. So those are kind of the resources that I recommend. So just to recap, join a Connect group, establish a regular Bible study time, ask some questions, and get some resources if you can. There's also a lot of good free resources online. There's one called Logos, which there's a paid version, but there's a free version now too that's pretty powerful as well. And you can look up the Bible. You can compare this version next to this version in there. You can highlight a word and do like a word study on it, so it'll tell you what the Greek word was there and then what that Greek word meant. It's pretty crazy stuff, all to help you understand things a little bit better. So yeah, let's dig those roots in deep. Does that sound good? Cool. I got some announcements for you guys, if you're cool with that. Some other ways that we can dig our roots in deep together. Number one is the Summit Conference.